Have you ever stopped to think about what could happen if you placed your complete trust in something greater than yourself? Proverbs 3:5-6 invites us to do exactly that. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him and He will make your path straight." This verse isn't just a simple suggestion, it's a roadmap for a transformed life. It's not about ignoring your reasoning or neglecting your intellect, but recognizing that there is a wisdom far greater than ours, one that sees beyond what we could ever imagine. What makes this so fascinating is the challenge hidden in these words. Trust is not always easy. It demands vulnerability and letting go of the control we often fight so hard to maintain. And yet, this kind of trust opens the door to something extraordinary, divine direction. Now let's pause for a moment and ask, what does it mean to trust God with all your heart? It's not just a feeling or a passing thought. It's a deep conviction that impacts every decision, every step, every plan. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When you stop leaning on your limited perspective and allow God to guide you, something remarkable happens. Life's uncertainties begin to lose their power over you. The burden of figuring everything out on your own starts to lift. And in that space you find clarity. A path that may not always be easy, but one that leads you to exactly where you're meant to be. But how do you reach this point? How do you fully surrender and embrace the promise of Proverbs 3:5-6? That's what we're about to explore together. Stay with me, because the answer is closer than you think. Trusting God with all your heart starts with a simple yet profound decision, acknowledging that His wisdom surpasses yours. It's not about discarding your ability to think or plan, but about recognizing the limitations of human understanding. How many times have we relied solely on our logic, only to find ourselves confused or lost? Life is full of twists and turns, and our perspective is often limited to the here and now. But God, He sees the entire picture, past, present, and future. When you lean on His wisdom, you tap into a source that's far beyond what your own reasoning could ever achieve. This type of trust also requires humility. It's not easy to admit that we don't have all the answers. Society often teaches us to be self-reliant, to trust only in what we can control. But true growth happens when we let go of the illusion of control and place our confidence in something greater. And then comes the second step, submitting to God in all your ways. This means inviting Him into every aspect of your life, your decisions, relationships, work, and even your struggles. It's not just about praying in moments of crisis, but about making God the center of everything you do. When you allow Him to guide your steps, you're no longer navigating life blindly. Instead, you're following a path laid out by the one who knows where it leads. And that's where the promise of Proverbs 3:5-6 shines brightest. God will make your paths straight. He doesn't promise a path without challenges, but He promises clarity, direction, and purpose. So the question is, are you ready to trust Him completely? Because when you do, everything changes. Let's dive deeper into how this trust can reshape your life. Trusting God also means confronting fear, the silent force that often holds us back. Fear whispers doubts in our ears, convincing us to rely on our limited understanding instead of stepping out in faith. But here's the truth. Fear and trust cannot coexist. One will always overpower the other. When you choose to trust God, you're making a deliberate decision to silence those doubts. You're saying, even if I don't see the whole picture, I will trust the one who does. This act of trust is not blind optimism. It's grounded in the assurance that God's plans are always for your good. Let's think about what it means for God to make your path straight. It doesn't mean life will be free from obstacles. What it means is that He will remove confusion and give you clarity about the direction you need to take. The twists and turns of life may still be there, but you'll walk through them with confidence, knowing He's guiding every step. And as you trust Him, something incredible begins to happen within you. You start to let go of the anxiety that comes from trying to control everything. Your heart becomes lighter and your mind clearer. That weight you've been carrying, it starts to fade as you realize you're not walking this path alone. This isn't just theory or wishful thinking, it's a promise, a guarantee from the Creator of the universe. And when God makes a promise, He always keeps it. Trusting Him transforms your perspective, your choices, and ultimately your life. But how do we take this trust and make it practical? What does it look like in our daily lives? Let's move forward and explore this together. Trusting God in practical terms means aligning your actions with your faith. It's not just about saying you trust Him, it's about living it out in real, tangible ways. One of the first steps is through prayer. When you bring your plans, your worries, and your questions to God, you're demonstrating that you rely on His guidance rather than your own understanding. Prayer is not just a ritual, it's a connection. It's where trust begins to grow because it's in those moments of quiet surrender that you open your heart to hear His direction. And often, His answers come not in grand gestures, but in subtle nudges, a sense of peace, an opportunity, or a word of encouragement from someone unexpected. Another way to live out this trust is through obedience. Proverbs 3:6 says to submit to Him in all your ways. This means being willing to follow God's guidance even when it doesn't align with your own plans or desires. Obedience requires faith that His way is better, even if it's not immediately clear. Think about the times in your life when you've been at a crossroads, unsure of which direction to take. Maybe you felt a pull toward a certain path, but fear or uncertainty held you back. Trusting God means stepping forward in faith, believing that He will light the way as you go. And here's where the beauty of this promise shines. As you trust and obey, you begin to see the evidence of God's work in your life. The straight paths He creates might not always look like what you expected, but they will always lead to a destination that's far greater than anything you could have planned for yourself. This kind of trust transforms not just your decisions, but your entire outlook on life. It's the foundation for a life filled with peace, purpose, and unwavering confidence in the God who is always faithful. Trusting God also requires patience, a virtue that can be challenging in a world that values instant results. When we submit our plans to God, we often expect immediate answers or visible changes. But God's timing operates on a different scale, one that is always perfect even when it feels delayed to us. Patience is an exercise of trust. It's the quiet assurance that even in the waiting, God is working. During these moments, He shapes your character, strengthens your faith, and prepares you for what's ahead. The waiting is not wasted time. It's a crucial part of the process. Think about the story of a farmer. After planting seeds, the farmer doesn't dig them up every day to check on their progress. Instead, he trusts the process, knowing that growth takes time. In the same way, when you trust God, you rest in the confidence that He is nurturing what you've entrusted to Him, even if you can't see the results yet. This patience also teaches us to let go of control. We're so accustomed to planning every detail of our lives that surrendering our timeline to God can feel uncomfortable. But in doing so, we experience a freedom that comes from knowing the outcome is in the hands of someone who sees the end from the beginning. And here's the beauty. When God's answer or provision finally comes, it often exceeds our expectations. What seemed like a delay was actually divine preparation. The blessings, the opportunities, and the peace that follow are far greater than anything we could have orchestrated on our own. So patience becomes not just a test of trust, but a testament to it. It's in the waiting that our faith is refined and our reliance on God deepens, and that's where the real transformation begins. Trusting God also involves releasing the grip of pride and self-reliance. It's tempting to believe that we can handle everything on our own, especially when we've been conditioned to equate independence with strength. But the truth is, real strength comes from recognizing our limits and leaning on God's unlimited power. Pride whispers, "You don't need help. You've got this under control." But how often has relying solely on yourself led to unnecessary stress, anxiety, or even failure? Trusting God means setting aside that pride and admitting, "I can't do this alone, and I don't have to." When we submit our plans and struggles to God, we're not admitting defeat. We're acknowledging His sovereignty. It's a shift from relying on human wisdom to seeking divine guidance. And with that shift comes peace. a deep, unshakable peace that only comes when you know you're no longer carrying the burden alone. Think of it like handing over the wheel of a car. When you let God take control, you're not abandoning responsibility. You're allowing Him to steer you in the right direction. You still play a role. You're in the car after all. But you trust that the ultimate navigation is in the hands of someone who knows the road better than you ever could. This surrender doesn't make you weaker. It makes you wiser. It's a sign of spiritual maturity, showing that you understand the value of depending on God. And as you let go of pride, you make room for God's strength to work in ways you never thought possible. So trusting God becomes an act of liberation. It frees you from the exhausting need to control every detail and opens the door for His perfect plan to unfold in your life. It's not giving up, it's giving over. And that's where true peace and purpose are found. Trusting God also means learning to silence the noise around us. In a world full of distractions, conflicting advice, and constant demands for our attention, it can be difficult to focus on what truly matters. But trusting in God requires tuning out the chaos and leaning into His voice. This isn't always easy. There are so many opinions, friends, family, society, telling us what we should do, what success looks like, and what our priorities should be. Yet Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds us to not lean on our own understanding or the understanding of others, but to rely fully on God. Silencing the noise involves intentionally creating moments of stillness. These are the times when we step away from the demands of life, turn off distractions, and open our hearts to listen to God's direction. It might be during prayer, in quiet reflection, or through studying His Word. These moments of stillness are where clarity often emerges. When the outside voices fade, God's guidance becomes clearer, and His voice often speaks with a sense of peace and assurance that worldly advice cannot provide. Trusting God in this way also requires discernment, being able to distinguish between His voice and the noise of the world. This discernment grows as you deepen your relationship with Him, learning to recognize the ways He communicates through Scripture, circumstances, or the prompting of the Holy Spirit. By silencing the noise, you create space for a connection with God that's both personal and powerful. It's in this space that trust is solidified, as you begin to see His hand at work in ways that you might have overlooked amidst the chaos. Trusting God also calls for obedience, even when His direction doesn't make sense to us. It's easy to trust when we see the clear path ahead, but what about when God asks us to take a step without knowing the outcome? Obedience is often where our faith is tested the most. God's instructions may not always align with our plans or desires. In fact, they may challenge our comfort zones and require us to do things that seem illogical or risky. But when we choose obedience, we align ourselves with God's will, and that is where true peace and purpose are found. Think about the story of Abraham. God asked him to leave everything he knew, everything that was familiar, to go to a place he had never seen. It didn't make sense at the time, yet Abraham trusted God and obeyed. As a result, God blessed him in ways he could never have imagined. When we obey God, we're not only showing our trust in Him, but also positioning ourselves to receive the blessings that come from following His plan. The blessings might not come immediately, and they may not come in the form we expect, but they always come in God's perfect timing and in ways that are beyond what we can comprehend. Obedience is a step of faith. It's an action that speaks louder than words. It's saying, I trust you, God, even when I don't understand. And in that obedience, God works in our lives, teaching us, shaping us, and leading us toward His greater purposes. Trusting God also requires patience, especially when the answers or results don't come right away. In a world where everything is instant, we often struggle with waiting. We want solutions now, and when things don't unfold on our timetable, frustration can set in. But trust and patience go hand in hand. God's timing is different from ours. While we may want immediate results, God sees the bigger picture. He knows what's best for us, and His timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. Patience is a key aspect of trusting God, and it's often in the waiting that God prepares us for the blessings He has in store. Consider the example of David. He was anointed as king as a young man, but it took many years before he actually ascended to the throne. During that time, David faced many trials, challenges, and moments of doubt. But in the waiting, God was refining David's character and preparing him for the leadership role he would one day have. In our own lives, patience allows God to work in ways that we may not immediately understand. Waiting isn't about passively sitting by. It's about trusting that God is at work behind the scenes even when we don't see it. The longer we wait, the more we learn to depend on Him and grow in our faith. So when it feels like nothing is happening or the answers are delayed, remember that God's delay isn't denial. It's an opportunity for your trust in Him to deepen. In the waiting, we learn patience, grow in faith, and discover that God is always at work, even when we can't see the results right away. Lastly, trusting God also means surrendering our control and letting go of the need to have everything figured out. We all like to be in control, to know what's next, and to feel secure in our plans. But when we trust God, we acknowledge that His ways are higher than ours. And sometimes, that means letting go of our need to manage every detail of our lives. Surrendering control is one of the hardest aspects of trust. It requires us to release our fears, our anxieties, and our desire to control outcomes. It's not about abandoning responsibility, but about recognizing that we are not in charge of everything. Trusting God means believing that He is sovereign, and His plans for us are always good, even if they look different from what we expected. Think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew the path ahead would be painful and difficult, yet He prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." This moment of surrender is one of the greatest examples of trusting God. Jesus, in His humanity, didn't want to face the suffering ahead, but He completely trusted His Father's plan and surrendered to it. In our own lives, surrendering doesn't mean giving up. It means giving over. It means choosing to trust God with our fears, doubts, and dreams. It's choosing to let go of the burden of control and allow God to guide us in His perfect way. When we surrender, we open the door for God to move in ways we could never have orchestrated on our own. We trust not only that He has a good plan, but also that He will lead us through every step of it, no matter how uncertain it may seem.